many of you have ever been chased by something before or someone? How many of you grew up with older brothers or sisters? Did your older brother or sister ever chase you around the house? How many of you, it was the reverse? You were the one chasing your siblings around the house? How many of you ever were chased by a bully at school or maybe even outside of school? How many of you have ever been chased by an angry dog? Oh, lots of you actually. Our initial instinct when we are being chased by something is to run. Is to run away. It's our self-preservation. Hey, I don't want to get mauled by that dog. I'm trying to get out of the way, or I'm trying to do this. And it's that instinct to run away. In life, sometimes we have an instinct to run away. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about a series called On the Edge of Greatness. We are on the edge of greatness in many areas of our life, our family, our business, whatever it may be. But there are some things that get in the way before we reach into that greatness side. And so one of those things that can reach in and stop us and prevent us from getting to what God has for us is that we run away right at the last minute. God has given us all different responsibilities in life and different career paths and whatnot, and God may be calling us to do something, but sometimes our initial instinct is to run away from what God is telling us to do. It may be the career that you have chosen to be, and God's like, that's not the one. I want you to do this one. When I was younger, I wanted to be a pediatrician, and God's like, no, you're going to be a pastor. And I'm like, I want to be a pediatrician. No, you're going to be a pastor. It may be that you have leadership abilities inside of you and that God is calling you to be a leader. It could be at your workplace. It could be in your school. It could be in ASB. It could be at the PTA, whatever it is, in the city council, whatever it may be. God is calling you to leadership, but you're running from the call that God has on you. For some of you, it may even be some sort of a ministry position as a pastor or as a missionary, taking the word of God around the globe. Maybe you've been running from living a life of integrity. You know what God has called you to do. You've read the book. You've seen what it says and how we're supposed to act, what we're supposed to do in these situations, but yet we choose to run from that. For some of us, we run away from giving fully of ourselves, fully of our time, fully of our resources, fully of our finances, and we will run away from the call that God has put on our life. Today, we're going to talk about a man who ran from God's call on his life. Here's the big idea. Your true love of God is demonstrated through your authentic love for others. Your true love of God is demonstrated through your authentic love for others. I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, "Hi, Jonah." We're going to be in the book of Jonah today. Today's going to be kind of more of a summary of all the chapters. I don't have time to go verse by verse and chapter by chapter because I know you want to go home today. So we're just going to kind of summarize some spots, so I'll fill in some of the blanks here and there. But let me set this story up for you. Jonah was considered to be a prophet of God. A prophet is somebody who is delivering a message that the Lord has given them to the specific people that he called them to speak to. So here's what you need to know. Jonah was an Israelite. He was a Jewish person. Jonah lived in a time where there was actually a lot of violence. There was a lot of hatred. There was actually a lot of corruption and jealousy. There was a lot of division among the people. Jonah also lived in a time where a lot of prejudice existed. We're going to start in Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So the name Jonah in Hebrew means dove. And then it says he's the son of Amittai. This is what that word means. Truth-telling. Truth-telling. That's a pretty good, interesting name for somebody who is a prophet. Now, here's what you need to know about this city of Nineveh. Jonah hated it. Jonah straight up hated them. He didn't want anything to do with them. There was bad blood going on forever and ever because they were not Jewish people. They were Gentiles. He hated them, did not want to associate with them at all. Do you happen to have some people in your life that you dislike? How many of you would actually raise your hand and be honest? We'll start with dislike. How many of you dislike bullies? How many of you dislike gangs? How many of you dislike those who are disrespectful? Ooh, there's a lot of murmuring on that one. All the teachers, yeah, I heard that. All the people in authority positions, like, man. Maybe you have a dislike for people who take the name of God in vain. Maybe you have a dislike for people who act entitled and want everything to be handed to them. Now, I want you to imagine that whoever that person or people group is that you have dislike for, imagine that God told you, I want you to go to them and give them a message that I'm going to destroy them. You're like, yes. Like, yes. You see, sometimes we hear something like, yes, I want judgment and wrath upon them. That sounds, they deserve it, Lord. They deserve it. It sounds like fun. But then you start like weighing the consequences of this. Well, if I really go and do this, if I really tell them what God has said, what if they react in a harsh manner? Now, in this time, this is how they would respond to somebody that they didn't like their message. They might pour tar all over their body. They might put feathers all over them and then light them on fire in the middle of the city. So now you might be rethinking this, taking this message to these people. Verse 3, but Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Why did Jonah run away? I'll tell you what I used to think it was, and then I'll reveal what it is later. I used to think that he ran away because of fear. Most of us in life, when we come towards something new or a different kind of responsibility that we don't want to deal with, we run away from the responsibility. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's, am I going to get hurt in this situation? Oh man, are they going to cancel me if I talk about this or I talk about that? Are they going to alienate? Is my business going to fall apart? Am I going to get trashed on Tehachapi rants and raves? Am I going to, like, all of these things, like, am I going to get destroyed if I actually stand up for what the Lord has told me to do? Sometimes we run away from responsibility just because we don't want to work that hard. Ooh, that sounds like some work. I try to avoid that at all costs. Sometimes we run away because we have a lack of confidence. We should never have a lack of confidence, because if it's God who sent you, he will resource you. He qualifies you for that moment. Sometimes we run away just because we want to avoid any discomfort in our life at all. No, that sounds a little bit uncomfortable, God. I don't really want to do that. Sometimes we run away because maybe we feel overwhelmed. Man, I got this happening. I got that happening. My bills, my business, my family. And God's calling you to do more. And you're just like, I'm overwhelmed, God. I don't have time for that. I can't handle that. Have any of you ever run away from responsibility before? We'll start with some simple ones. How many of you have ever run away from taking out the trash? Yes, I'm looking at the front row. I'm looking at my son in the back. How many of you have ever run away from doing the dishes and doing the laundry? And I will just tell you, dishes and laundry, that's on my top hate list. Because they're never done. They always reappear. They always reappear. It's a job that never ends. Now let's talk about some harder things now. Sometimes people run away from being a parent. They run away from the responsibility of being a mom, the responsibility of being a dad, or the responsibility of being a husband or a wife. Sometimes people run away from things that you may think, oh, that's silly. Sometimes people run away from responsibilities like paying their taxes. Sometimes people run away from things like paying your debts. Sometimes people run away from doing things like this, resolving conflict in a relationship. Oh, that's going to take too much work. Nah, I don't really want to talk to them anymore. We run away from the things that God has called us to. Yeah, we'll just pretend like that didn't happen. Some of us run away from just our responsibilities at work or our responsibilities at school. Maybe you made a mistake on something, but you don't want to tell anybody, so you would rather it just kind of linger out there and it's going to cause harm and problems, but hey, you don't want to own it. You don't want to apologize for it. So we all have a tendency to run away, but where do we run to? Where do we run to in life? For some of us, when something isn't happening right in our life, the place that we run to is the bar. For some of us in life, when things are going a certain way, we go, I'm going to run to pornography. For some of us in life, when we're going through something hard, I'm going to run to drugs. Or, hey, something in my life, something over here, it's really stressing me out, so I'm going to run back to these toxic relationships. These people that are actually harming my life, but they're going to side with me, so I'll go back to them. Sometimes in life, we run to things like food. Food is my comfort. So I'm going to eat this, I'm going to eat that, I'm going to do this. Sometimes we run to this, and before you know it, you start drooling. I'm just trying to numb away the pain of my life by scrolling endlessly forever and ever. Jonah ran away by getting on a boat going in the opposite direction of where God told him to go. Verse 4. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. Again, I got to summarize some big chunks here, so I'm just going to fill you in here. So a terrible storm came. The boat was on the verge of sinking. The people on the boat, the crew on the boat, they were foreigners, and they're like freaking out about this. Jonah's actually inside the boat sleeping during the storm. And the crew, they're trying to figure out what's going on, who sinned, who did wrong. And so they actually cast lots. It comes up that it is Jonah. They go wake Jonah up, and Jonah's like, yep, it is me. I ran away from God. And then they're like, well, what do we do? And Jonah says, well, you should throw me into the water and then everything will get calm. They're like, no, we don't want to do that. And he's telling them, no, throw me into the water and everything's going to get calm. I need you to understand that Jonah literally was giving up on his life. He was committing suicide. throw me into the water. He didn't say, hey, can you throw me out there, but give me a couple of planks of wood to float on, eventually I'll, maybe another boat will pick me up or I'll float into, a port somewhere. No, just throw me into the water and leave me to die. Many times in life, we try and quit on God. And we'll actually disqualify ourselves. No, I can't do that. God's like, I didn't say that. I didn't say that about you. You see, God is about love and mercy. It doesn't matter what you have done, and God can use you if you are willing. You see, because Jonah ran away from the call that was on his life. And so he thought, it's over. I'm done. But God wasn't done with him. Jonah chapter 1, verse 17. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now I know what you're thinking. Is this fish for real? So I'm just going to level with you. If I can believe that there is a God who created the sun, who created the moon, who created the stars, who created planets, who created weather systems, who created vast bodies of water and land and humans and plants and animals. I think this is within his power to make a giant fish come up. So a giant fish comes up and swallows Jonah for 3 days. Now, eventually, someday, I will do like a verse-by-verse study of the book of Jonah, but that's not today. There's a lot of symbolism here. If you wanted to study it out, I would encourage you to study it out. He gets swallowed by the fish. How does he not get chewed up in that process? He is swallowed whole. And then how is he alive inside the belly of this thing? There's a lot of miracles happening here to keep Jonah alive. So he's inside this belly of this fish for 3 days, and he cries out to the Lord. This is kind of a rock bottom moment for Jonah. Maybe you've had a rock bottom moment in your life. Or maybe you know somebody who's gone through some sort of rock bottom moment, and it was kind of in that moment that they decided to change, that they decided to transform, they decided to walk away from the drugs or the alcohol or whatever, to go back to their husband or go back to their wife or whatever it may be. Rock bottom moments aren't necessarily a bad thing if we allow it to help us go back to the Lord. Jonah chapter 2, verse 10. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Okay, this is just disgusting. A fish vomits him up onto the land. Now we're going to jump to Jonah chapter 3. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it. Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. So he goes into the city. We're told it's a big city. He's walking everywhere, and he goes, and this is the message that he is delivering. 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. So he stepped up to the responsibility, the calling that God had put on his life. He goes to deliver the message that God told him to do. And it's a short message. Sometimes we get worried about trying to have all of these words. It's a short message. In English, it's 8 words. In Hebrew, it's actually 5 words. He goes to the city and says, this 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Short and sweet. That's his sermon. That's his message. 8 words. You'd be like shocked if I preached for 8 words and was done. Many years ago when I was a youth pastor, we were having a Christmas party. And like when you have a Christmas party and you're a youth pastor, you're having like games and, competition, different things. You're having like gift exchange and people are dressing up and like you might have some food. And it was totally just like a hangout Christmas party. There was nothing really spiritual supposed to be happening, but just hanging out. Well, we're getting to the end of the night, and I feel like the Lord just tells me, you need to talk to them. You need to tell them about me. And I'm like, God, I didn't study anything this week. I didn't prepare anything. I don't have any sort of like message. He's like, you need to tell them. And I'm like, ah. So the kids, they're sitting there eating nachos. And I just, for like 2 to 3 minutes, I just tell them about who Jesus is, how much he loves them, and that he took the sin of everybody upon himself. He sacrificed himself on the cross. And 3 days later, he resurrected, giving an opportunity for every single one of us to have a new life in him. I asked them to close their eyes. If they wanted to receive the Lord, 10 hands over eating nachos. Sometimes you don't have to have lots of words. Sometimes it's just being obedient. You see, God's already prepared something to happen. He just needs you to do your part. So are we doing our part, or are we running from what he has for us? Verse 5. The Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth. Okay. He went, 8-word sermon, walking through the city, telling them what's about to happen, and everybody turns and believes to the Lord. If you read all the scriptures there, it also says the king turns to the Lord. They repent. They call a fast in their entire community. They're putting sackcloth on. I mean, they are going all out. They turn to the Lord. Verse 10. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. God spared the city from destruction. Now, this seems like a good thing. Jonah chapter 4, verse 1. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord. Isn't this what I said? Lord, when I was still at home, that is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and a compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, I told you earlier, oftentimes when we think about the story of Jonah and about him running from God, we think it's because he's afraid. He is actually full of hate. He hated these people so much, he didn't want to go tell them about who God was because he knew God would be compassionate to them. I mean, man, that's pretty rough. Hate destroys people. God said his mercy is available to all who will seek it, to all who will repent and turn to him. The story goes on that God has a conversation with Jonah, basically saying this: you have no right to be angry. Did you make those 120,000 people in that city? I made them. They're my children. If I want to save them, I will. You don't have a right because they're my creation. If God tells you to share the love of Jesus with somebody, would you just do it? Would you just do it? It could be a gang member. It could be the bully. It could be the cheer captain. It could be the boss that you hate. It could be your neighbor whose dog always poops on your lawn. It could be the kid who always rides their bike and they run over your sprinkler head and break it. It could be people who look different than you. Maybe their skin color is different than yours. Maybe they identify differently than you do. They're still God's children. Now, I'm not saying that you got to approve of every choice and every decision that other people make and that I think that's biblical or not. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that they are God's children and we need to love them. How many of you have voicemail on your cell phone? right? If you have voicemail on your cell phone, when somebody calls and you don't answer, it says like, hi, you've reached the phone of Nick Smith. Sorry, I couldn't answer the phone right now. If you'd please leave your name, I will be happy to reach back in a few moments. But how many of us use our phone to kind of screen calls? Like we just don't answer, right? If it's a number that you don't recognize, you're like, nope. I don't need any more solar for my house. I have my cell phone provider, when somebody calls, it'll put this term up there, scam likely. Boop. For sure, I'm not talking to you. But this is what happens too. We have caller ID. It could be friends, it could be family, it could be your boss, your coworker, and they call and you see their name and you're like, hey, voicemail. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to do what they have asked me to do. Unfortunately, we do this with God sometimes. He calls our number and we're like, ooh, go to voicemail. And we run from the responsibility. We run from the calling. We run from the thing that he has told us to do. You see, it's pretty easy, and I think most of us would agree that I want God's love. I want God's forgiveness. I want God's grace and mercy in my life. I want God's blessing in my life. But most of us may say, but I don't really want to have to do anything for any of that. I don't want to have to live that out in my life. That's hard. Why would I do that? Because if you do that, you have to do things like this. Love your enemies. Oh, come on. I really don't like them. Love those who persecute you. Are you kidding me, God? If we're really honest with ourselves, we all probably have some people in our lives that are not easy to love. And we all may have some prejudices inside. Maybe they look differently than you. Maybe they think differently. Maybe they vote a political party who's different than yours. Maybe they identify differently than you. And again, I'm not saying any of it is right, but there can be people who are hard to love. But if we truly love God, we have to love other people. We have to show people who God is. We also have to learn to forgive people. No, they hurt me. They don't deserve my forgiveness. Did you deserve God's forgiveness? We may also have to apologize to some people because you've been treating them poorly, or you've said some things you shouldn't say. We also need to answer the call of responsibility that he's put on our lives. Maybe that's as a mom, a dad, a husband, a wife. Maybe that's as a friend, a leader, somebody in the community. You can try and run from God, but you're never going to be satisfied without God. Will you have the courage to obey the voice of God? The big idea today was this: your true love of God is demonstrated through your authentic love for others. We're living in a very divided time, and we as believers need to step up. And we need to love people right where they are, messiness and all. People don't come perfect. Did you come perfect to God? No, you were screwed up. And you needed Jesus. They need Jesus too. And so would we be the people that would tell others about Jesus?